Let me welcome you all to our program tonight. My name is Cathy Andrews. I'm the senior librarian at the Salinas Public Library for Adult Services and Literacy. And I'm being assisted tonight by Kristen Macy, who has been participating in our genealogy work group and coming to some of the classes and agreed to be my tech support tonight. Thank you very much, Kristen, for that. And I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let me go ahead and share my screen. You know, when we're working on genealogy, then it's really clear that, that we've got an interest in our relatives. And sometimes it doesn't matter what the exact relationship is. It's just interesting to find out more about them if there's someone that you've never met. Often there are interesting stories. Sometimes there may be just interesting patterns or statistics about someone, but it can make a real difference to understand how people fit into the bigger picture of your family tree. For a lot of folks, it can be a little confusing trying to sort out. There's some jargon that goes along with identifying relatives. And so we're going to do our best tonight to sort of sort it out in a way that will make it possible when you are working on your own for this to be able to go ahead and, you know, understand what relationship everyone has to you or to other members of your family that are part of your tree. So, you know, when you have someone in your family tree, we need to know who that person is, and we also need to know how is it that we're related. As you come down through the generations, you know, sometimes you can trace the relationships quite easily, sometimes it's quite obvious. When it comes to why understanding kinship or relationships matter, in our English speaking American world, you know, the kinds of things that make the most difference. One I'm calling descent. Who are your ancestors? Who are you descended from? What do you know about them? What lessons can you learn that you might be able to apply in your own life? It can really help with context to understand how someone is related to you. And even if they're in-laws, learning more about them and where they fit into the tree, and sometimes even who's in their tree, can help give you context for a time period, for what your own ancestors might have been going through. Another reason that people want to know about relationships is because it makes a difference for marriage. Different cultures have different restrictions or taboos on marriage, how closely related people are or not. It's also, it can make a difference for DNA research. Now, talking about relationships and DNA research is its own program. I'm just going to touch on it tonight in the context of general family relationships. But when you're doing DNA research, and you're trying to solve some puzzles or fill in some blanks in your own family tree, understanding that how someone who's, say, a fifth cousin is related to you and where they might be able to help, their information might be able to help with a brick wall or a blank spot in your tree, can be really helpful. Another thing with DNA is both for understanding inheritance. There might be medical issues, there might be other kinds of issues. It also gets used, relationships are really crucial. I was reading an article about a professional genealogist who works with the military. So when they find remains, they are trying to track down who the closest relation is so that they can inform the family about those remains. And the DNA is combined with family research is a big part of that. From a legal perspective, the primary thing that the legal piece is about is that if someone dies without a will, or even depending on how the will is written, it can make a difference. For example, whether you can inherit or not. If someone is without a will, intestate, there are different rules about who is the next of kin. And so sometimes it has an actual legal impact. When it comes to how you can figure out the relationships, even with just the direct ancestors, so we're not talking cousins and aunts and uncles, there are a lot of people as you go back through generations. If you just look at your direct ancestors, that first generation, there are your two parents. It doubles for the next generation, you have 4 grandparents. And this applies to everyone. You would not be here without two parents, both of whom have to have 2 parents. The third generation is where the great grandparents start. There would be 8 great grandparents, 16 great great grandparents, 32 third great grandparents, etc. In the 10th generation, you would have 1,024 eighth great grandparents. And so this is one of the reasons when a historical figure, if someone tells you they're related to an historical figure, depending on how far back that figure is, thousands and thousands and thousands of people will also be related to that historical figure. This is just your direct ancestors. If you start thinking about in each generation, in general, lots of the families will have multiple children. There will be some people who will not have children, may not get married, may have died young. But even in that case, if each pair has 2 to 4 children who then have children, the further back you go, the greater the number of people that are out there. And the more, that's why it's so complicated as soon as you're back a couple of generations, to try to make sure you're really clear on how you're related to other people in your tree. Now, again, for us in America and in many of the English-speaking countries, there's a consistent formula. I'm listing these 4 things not in a particular order, but these are the 4 considerations that go into the formula for how we label people. One thing is the gender, another is what generation they are. The consanguinity, which is about the blood relations or direct descendants, and then the immediate, right around you, affinal, the in-laws, are another piece of it. When we're talking about the direct family line, the lineal line is about lines, so it's the direct line. That's one way to keep it in mind. There's of course your mother and your father. Obviously, their titles are broken down by the sex or gender. When it comes to the grandparents, again, you're going to have great grandmother, great grandfather. You start in with the greats. You have siblings, the name of their relationship to you, brother or sister. When we look at what is often referred to as the collateral lines, these are folks that are related to you, but they're not in the direct line. Then you have, for example, your aunt and uncle. You have cousins, and for us, cousins is for both male and female. And then there's, the grand level. Let me just mention, it's not uncommon for folks to call the siblings of their grandparents, it's really common for people to call them their great aunt or their great uncle, which is fine. That's how we always called my, Aunt Jeanette was my great aunt. The more appropriate term is grand, in the same way that your grandparents, your grand aunt and uncle, and then the greats, just like with the grandparents, start with that next generation. And then you've got your in-laws. Obviously, the in-laws are not related to you by blood, but marriage, if the marriage is a strong bond, then on a day-to-day basis, those folks may be as present in your life as anyone who is related by blood. My family, my direct family is all back in Michigan. I've got all in-laws out here. and they are definitely family for me, but we are not related in the direct line. There are a couple other terms that come up. One is kissing cousins. The most common definition of that is just family members who are far enough apart that they probably are cousins, but you know them well enough that at a family event, not during the pandemic, they're the ones that you might give a kiss to when in greeting them. Another term I've run across is a shirttail cousin. The particular example that I know of in my in-laws family was someone who was not related to the family either by blood or marriage, but was the son of a close neighbor, and the parents were busy working, and so he was often at the house with the family, and they just called him a shirttail cousin because they considered him part of the family, even though there was no formal or legal relationship. And you may have heard some other some other descriptions that are used that are specific to your family, or maybe part of if you have a cultural background that's outside the American English speaking background, then you may know some other related. What I'd like to do now is share. There's one video that I found online. It's a longer video. We're just going to listen to a couple minutes of it because this guy does a pretty fun job with illustrating some of the kinship systems around the world. Because the way that we do kinship, the way that we use kinship within genealogy is very different than many other cultures. And so I'm gonna let this play for a couple minutes. We will have I can make sure to put the link in the chat so you have it. And this is not the only good video about kinship or relationships, but he covers a lot of ground really fast. So let's give this a listen.
Translating your family tree into another language should be simple, right? Just pick a family member and look up the kinship term. So in Samoa, your sister is your uso, unless you are her brother, in which case she's your tuafafine. And for the Ashanti, your parent's nephew is your cousin, except your father's sister's son, who might also get called father. Clearly, there's not just one way to talk about family. But the intriguing thing is, with thousands of languages around the world, there aren't thousands of kinship systems. In fact, there may only be a handful. Let's start with you. You're generation 0. By your side, you have siblings. Let's give you a brother and a sister. One generation up, we meet your parents, mother and father. They have their own siblings, your aunts and your uncles. Up one more, and oh, look, your grandparents. Okay, back to your uncle and aunt. Their children are down in your generation, and they are all cousins, no matter which aunt or uncle on which side of the family. What we just described is the Inuit kinship system. No, not English, though we do use this system. See, traditionally, the world's languages are grouped into 6 kinship systems. Languages in this Inuit system treat close family differently from family to the side of them, their collateral kin. Now imagine if we dropped this lineal collateral distinction. The terms for aunt and uncle would become indistinguishable from the word for parent, and siblings and cousins would use the same terms for each other, which is exactly what happens in Hawaiian kinship. It cares about something else too. Are you a brother or a sister? If you're a sister to your sister or a brother to your brother, you use one word, kaikwa'ana. But a brother to a sister or a sister to a brother, they have their own brother or sister words. That's still not enough though. You also need to respect age. In Hawaiian, there's one sameness word for an older sibling and a different sameness word for a younger sibling. The younger brother of a brother or a younger sister of a sister are kaikaina. Whew. Well, just like English has Inuit kinship, there are other languages that use the Hawaiian system too. Remember the Samoan word uso, sometimes shortened to us? That's for sibling sameness too. This can get confusing. Here, let me make you a chart. Save it and please review it before you ever try and translate brother or sister in a Malayo-Polynesian language. Notice how these two systems we've been using lump terms together. So many distinct people under the same word cousin. There's so many different people getting called auntie and uncle. Well, what if we broke these apart? What if we gave unique terms to every single relation from yourself on the tree? Your wish comes true in the Sudanese kinship system. If you studied Latin, maybe you tried to map ancient family terms onto your English ones, or Inuit ones in English. It's a strange world. But the old Romans didn't talk about family that way. They had distinct terms for each of your various aunts and uncles and cousins. Your mother's sister is not your father's sister, after all. This isn't just some ancient system. Today, Chinese kinship terms are at least as descriptive as this. Plus, they demand you pay attention to age. Just imagine the piles of basic kinship terms Mandarin has because of this. I've even read that finding the shortest path between kin members in your family, answering questions like, what do you call your mother's uncle? That gets tricky enough that you're better off using computer algorithms to solve it. But hey, at the very least, everyone's clearly labeled.
So, there literally are apps to assist Chinese family members in understanding, in being able to figure out the appropriate term for every person who's a relation to them, because it is the only way to be respectful to someone is to use the correct term, and it varies for every point. Every single kind of combination has its own name, and also each of those combinations, depending on whether it's older or younger, has a name. So there are many younger Chinese Americans who are using apps to make sure that they are using the appropriate kinship term. Now, for our purposes, when we're talking about kin, we know the specific names for those that have reciprocal terms. So parents have children, aunts and uncles have nieces and nephews. When it comes to describing cousins, which is the big pool that one word stands for everything, for our purposes, what we work with, there are two pieces. One is the degree of cousinship, and the other is the removes. And we're going to go into some detail on what that is. All right, so when it comes to degree, it's about how separated you are by distance to a common relative. When it comes to the number of generations to that closest shared relative, by way of example, if you have a second cousin, then that tells you that you share great grandparents. So there are a couple of different ways to calculate it. One of the things from here on out, all the different ways to figure things out that we're going to talk about, I'm going to present you with at least a couple of options, because everybody approaches this differently in what really sticks for them, in order to understand it. Okay. So when you're figuring out degree, one way that people suggest you track it is you count the number of greats back to that shared relative and add one. So second cousins who share a great grandparent, there's one great, we add the one, we get two, they're second cousins. Personally, I find it a little easier. Another way to calculate it is to count the G's. So then it doesn't matter whether it's a grandparent or whether it's the word great. If you count the G's, you don't have to do any add one, subtract one, none of that. So if you share great grandparents, that has two G's. Therefore, you are second cousins. Let me take a moment. Are there any questions about the degree piece?
I was going to ask if you could give an example with like third cousins.
You bet. Let me go on. I think my next slide, yes, is a cousin chart. So I'm going to show you a bunch of different cousin charts. I'm using this one to get us started. This is one type of cousin chart that has you on it. Okay. So when you come up the line, the first stop is your parents. If you share parents with someone else, they're your sibling, your brother or sister. If you share grandparents with someone else, they're your first cousin. They are the child of your aunt or uncle. If you share great grandparents, right? So here we got the G plus the G. So that person across from you is your second cousin. If we go up one more level, then the great great grandparents as the common ancestor are your third cousins. So if we had a much bigger chart, your fourth cousins would be your most common, most recent common ancestor would be great 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 grandparent. So if you know someone is your fifth cousin, then you know that they are your four great grandparent, right? Because we've got a G from grandparent and we've got the four greats, and that gives us a fifth cousin. Does anyone want to hop in? How about your eighth cousin? How many greats would that person have, who is the common ancestor with your eighth cousin?
Would that be 6?
It'd be 7, because we've got one G from grandparent. So
right.
8 minus 1 is 7. So that leaves 7 great grandparent, right? And if you do DNA matching, you know that you will get everything from second, first and second cousins all the way out to 5, 6, 7, 8th cousins. And that means that your common ancestor is way, way back there generation wise. So is this starting to make sense in terms of, we're talking about the degree, so we're not talking removals yet, we're just talking about degree. So it's you and everybody that's in the same generation as you. You can either go back to the shared ancestor and come down to have it, or now you know how to know what cousin they are for second, third, fourth, fifth, etc. And you can tell who the most recent common ancestor is going to be. What I think is the simplest way to be able to identify the degree of cousin is to count the G's in the title of the most recent common ancestor. So if my most recent common ancestor with someone is the grandparent, there is 1 G. They are my first cousin. Jumping to another example, if the most recent common ancestor is the great great grandparent, that has 3 G's. So coming down the line, that person is my third cousin. And you can go on from there. There are charts. This one I'm using to start with because it's relatively simple. There are charts that go out to 8th and 9th and 10th grandparent. Okay. But are you seeing the pattern there? Find the most recent common ancestor. Count the G's in their title. And when you count those G's, that will tell you what degree of cousin they are. Okay. The next piece of being able to accurately describe how someone is related to you is what's called removals. That has to do with what generation the person is in. The folks that were in the same generation as you, there is no removal. When you share grandparents, your first cousin, right? There is no removal. Your first cousin has a child, there's a generation shift, okay? So that's where we start getting into removals. So again, the example, a first cousin that has children, their first cousin's once removed. Now we're gonna go through a chart because they're with removals, it goes both up and down the tree. You know, the removals happen in both directions. People that are in a generation that is older than your generation, people that are in a generation that is younger than your generation. So removals can start to feel confusing, but grab hold real tight to the idea that if we're using removal as part of the description of your cousin, it's because there's a difference in generations. Please keep in mind that generations refers to the family structure, not the time period. You could be born in different generation decade wise from someone, but in your family generation, you know, you might be in the same layer. So the age of the person is not important. The date of their birth is not important. It's where they fit in the family tree in relation to you. Are they in a generation that is older than you, that is ahead of you, or are they in a generation that is younger behind you? If they're in the same generation, then there is no removal. Okay, I know sometimes this is one that starts to baffle people, so I want to make sure folks are feeling comfortable with it. I'm gonna show you the examples. So we're going back to the same cousin chart. Okay, so here you are. If the most common ancestor that you share with someone is a grandparent, but the other person is of a different generation, then that's where the removed starts. So your first cousin has a child, that's a different generation than you, so they're your first cousin once removed. Now, this blue line, which is your parents' generation, so if the person and I share great grandparents, but they are in an older generation than I am, they are a first cousin once removed. Okay? Because there is one generation of difference between myself and them. When we get to second cousins and removals, you know, the child of your second cousin is also your second cousin. Again, they're once removed. They are one generation different from you. When that second cousin has a child, second cousin twice removed, because they are two generations different from you. Okay, so when you're in the same generation, there's no removal. When your link is the same person but different, you are in different generations, that's where the removals happen. It's about what generation you're part of. Go ahead with your question.
So my question is, the example you gave, you talked about second cousins. So if I have a second cousin and the second cousin has two children, would those two children be second cousins, two second cousins once removed? That's my question.
Each of them is a second cousin because they are the child of your second cousin. Because they are not in the same generation, they're the child. They are a second cousin once removed.
So for documentation, would I put two second cousins once removed?
I'm not sure what you mean by documentation. You know, I'd encourage you to think of each person kind of individually. It means that you have two second cousins once removed. Somebody else might have six second cousins once removed.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, Cathy, we have one other question that's kind of right here. It's coming from Joseph. Are these the same rules for terms that Ancestry.com uses?
Yes, they are. So if you, you know, I've got tons of people in my ancestry tree. And sometimes I'm scrubbing a line because I haven't looked at it in a while. I'm looking to see if there's any new hints, and I'll click on somebody um, because there's hints and start following the hints. And then I'll be like, oh, look, they're not super closely related to me because they're once or twice or three times removed, but we do share an ancestor. And you know, they are contemporaries of, it might be my grandparents, my great grandparents, you know, so looking at what they have can help me understand, you know, they're not part of my direct line, but I'm interested in more than just my direct line, because every clue I get from every person that's related helps me track the people I am most interested in. So yeah, when you look at Ancestry or Family Search, then it will be using these terms. I know it can take some practice, but once you understand that degree is sort of side to side and removals are up and down from your generation, then it starts to, you know, as you go over it, it starts to fall into place a little better. In searching to see how many different kinds of charts I could find, my experience so far with the kinship system that we're using is that there's essentially two styles of charts. Like sometimes when you're out there reading an article about cousins, every article has its own style of chart. Really, it can start to feel like I can work this chart, but I don't really understand it, and it's different than this other chart. So do I really understand my cousins? Um, if you think of the charts as essentially falling into two styles, there's ones similar to the one that we just used, which are centered on you. There's a place for you on that chart. And then we're talking about how people are related to you. And then the other, this is just the word I'm using. They're a more universal chart. You can use them to find out relations to you, but you can also figure out relations between other people who are not you that are part of your family. So if I wanted to figure out how my grandfather is related to somebody several generations back in the family tree, how he's related to me doesn't matter. It's how he's related to that person. So that's when the universal chart is handy. It'll work for you. It'll work for anybody else. Any other interrelationship that you're trying to sort out. So this example, this is one of the most simple ones that's out there, and it's lovely because it's got the straightforward color coding. So if that's something that helps you sort things, it's got the generational color coding. Almost all the charts will list the generation number on the side, and so depending on how far back they go, the generation is gonna be different. On this chart, where it starts with great great grandparents, they're listed as generation 1. If you've got a chart that goes back to 8th great grandparents, they might be listed as generation 1. Okay, it's just the nature of how the charts are constructed. It helps you keep track of what line you're on. Again, it's the U chart, and it's one of the most straightforward if you don't have to go back too far. If you want some practice, this is a great one. Here's another chart that shows up pretty regularly. And again, it doesn't go back much further, but it just has a slightly different rearrangement. All the terms are essentially the same. In this example, which is used, you know, the person who created this chart in their presentation, you'll notice that you are in a slightly different position. You're inboard rather than outboard. Doesn't make a difference. All the relationships are still the same. And then they were explaining in their presentation about Bob. How do we figure things out about your relationship with Bob? So that's why it says Bob there. It's just and Sue up here. Those are the examples that this person was using. If you like the style of this chart, no colors, very straightforward, square corners on the boxes, then you could, you know, cross out Bob and cross out Sue, and you would be in good shape for going ahead and using this chart. Again, here's another example. This one I chose because it also includes the in-laws. And so the main thing it does about the in-laws is it just connects the fact that each layer of relations You're basically just applying the word in-law to it. When I moved out here, I married into a family and had a 90-some-year-old, sharp as a whip grandpa in-law. And so, he and I are not related by anything other than marriage, but he was very much part of the family. And so, again, this is really, each of you are going to have charts that you like better and charts that, for whatever reason, don't appeal to you. So find the chart that you like best. Here's another one that just goes back further generations. But you can see that it has basically the same information. You are here. And then as you work your way back, here's the great grandparent. We come down, there's the second cousin, same generation, right? So you're seeing all the same information. This one was kind of fun. I include it because it's got you in it, but you're basically following the purple dots over to the line that will tell you, like here's the parent's sibling, and then it's the nephew and niece is there. This is also one that can be all of them. You can start with what you know. The person's my fourth cousin, so what relative do we share? And again, some people are going to look at this and just say no. Some people are going to look at this and think it's perfect. Now here's sort of the most common example of the more universal chart. And on this chart, the same generation comes down at a diagonal. Okay, just see how we're coming down through here, and there are no removes on this diagonal. So on this one, it works for you. It works for finding relationships to other people in your tree. So on the top, you pick from the most recent common ancestor, what would that person that you're trying to identify, what would their title be? So if someone is the grandchild of the common ancestor and another family member is also the grandchild of that common ancestor, they're first cousins. If someone is the grandchild of the most common ancestor, but the other person is the third great grandchild, then they're your first cousin 3 times removed. So this one, it can be you that you're looking at as one of the lines, or it can be 2 people, that you're trying to figure out. So it's not just in relation to you. There's another relatively common, I threw this in at this point because when you're looking at degrees of kinship for genetic purposes, if you are doing DNA, then one of the things and again, I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, is that every generation, folks are related by half the DNA. Okay, so you have half the DNA of your parent. So you see the degree is considered, one way that it gets described as first degree, and you're sharing half the DNA. For your grandparents, who would be the second degree, you're sharing 25% or a quarter of the DNA. Each degree, so third degree is going to share essentially 12.5% of the DNA. Fourth degree, it gets smaller and smaller as you go because it goes by half each generation or each remove. By the time you get to your 8th cousins, the amount of genes that you share are really, really tiny. It doesn't mean that it won't help you in identifying things, but it's why when they tell you that there is a range that the people who match some DNA with you could fall into, the folks who are at number 4 are cousins, but there's also nephews and nieces, right? There's aunts and uncles. That's one of the reasons that it gets complicated in trying to sort out DNA connections and find out whether someone you've never met before, exactly what bucket do they fall into. If you want to know more about DNA, there are a number of really excellent videos available. There also are a bunch that can help you get started or get more clarity at the Roots Tech Connect site. this year's the 2021 conference. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end because there are tons of resources out there thanks to Roots Tech Connect. I throw this in here because I want to just make sure you understand that degrees of kinship in genetics, you're just coming at it a different way than you are, but knowing how someone is related to you can help make a difference for figuring out where they might fit in your tree. When it comes to marriages, there are practices and there are laws about how closely related you can be to someone that you want to marry. There are a variety of reasons for those laws. Someone who is in your direct line is never someone you're going to be able to marry. Parents, grandparents, children, etc. Someone who is in the cousin category. This is an example from an application to ask for an exception that's about, it's through the Catholic Church for an exception to marry, and they give two examples to show, how someone is related. And for this kind of circumstance, when it comes to approval for marriage in this religious setting, you cannot be any closer than fourth degree. You need to be in the fifth degree before you would be allowed to marry. In this circumstance, the way that they figured out to count it up is that you identify who the common ancestor is. You're going to count the steps between you and the person you want to marry. You do not include the common ancestor. So in this case, John wants to marry Mary. There's George, there's Martha, there's Mary. It's the fourth degree. They would need permission because it is right on the edge of being too close. Whereas in this case, again, it's another John wanting to marry a Mary. Their common ancestor is Charles. So we're counting the steps. We're not including Charles in that. Because they are the fifth degree removed by this definition, they would not require a dispensation. And it was kind of interesting. I was looking at the form that people fill out to ask for the dispensation. So when they are in the fourth degree, they are required to have a discussion within the church about the implications and complications of a marriage within a close degree. They're also required to talk to a medical professional for genetic counseling about it so that they are aware of all the possible health implications. I know that one of the things that is taken into consideration when a dispensation is asked for is, have there been other dispensations in the family that would have an impact on this one? So if some of the people in the ancestor line themselves had a dispensation, that might have an impact on whether the dispensation was approved or not. This chart, which is in a diamond shape, is the one that comes up when it has to do with canon law, which is the religious exceptions. This is essentially the square or rectangular chart. It's just set on a diamond. I'm not sure why. Maybe it fits on the page better. And so you would identify one of the people on this side. You would find the other person on the other side, and then you would come down at a diagonal. So if one person is here and the other person is in number 2 on the other side, first cousin 4 times removed. So it's essentially the same as the rectangular chart, the quote universal chart. It's just set in a different way, and you're coming down the lines to where they cross, not across the lines. Let me stop sharing for a moment, and let's take a second. I can pop back into the charts if we need to, but when you think about your family members and identifying, off the top of your head how someone might be related to you, what degree of cousin, whether there's a remove or not. How are you feeling? Are you feeling like you've got some confidence about that? Okay, I see you smiling. Does that mean no, or does that mean yes?
No. But that's okay. I came in late, so I'll have to just research more. I was wondering, though, when I pulled up my ancestry, they were talking about me finding connections through my DNA to, I guess, third and fourth and fifth cousins.
Uh-huh.
And does that really affect me? I don't know. I mean, how important is it to know that?
Let me go back for a second just to one of the charts. So if someone is your third cousin, then it means that the relationship you have with them is through the most common recent ancestor is your great great grandparents. Okay. And for me, that takes me back to these early 18, late 1700s. And so I've got a brick wall with my great great grandfather on one of my lines. And so whenever someone pops up as potentially a third cousin, depending on which side of the family they're from, they may not be from that side that I've got the brick wall on, but some of their information, if they have a tree linked there, then I'm looking to see if I can get some help with the great great grandparents and down from there. So just because they're further back, you may both know who the great great grandparents are, but maybe you don't know all of the siblings or all of the children of that person.
I see.
And again, it's a super common question that folks have. Why should I care about people that are only marginally related to me? The reason is, especially if they were in the same geographic area, that they're going to show up. They're going to show up as sponsoring someone's baptism, being a godparent. They might be the executor of a will. And that will, which they're the executor of, might have information that you haven't seen yet, not only about the person that they're the executor for, but their children, their spouse, their spouses. Even to find out about the people that mean the most to you, it can be helpful to take a look at all those collateral folks.
Okay, that makes sense.
What other questions have you got, folks? Can you do you feel like you would be able to walk away from this training and use the charts? Is there a chart I can go back over? Diane, looks like you've got a question.
If my mother has a second cousin, then what does that make that cousin to me?
Well, let me hop back in here. So who would be the common ancestor that you and that person share?
That's what I don't quite have a handle on. It's a great something.
Yeah.
Great somebody.
Well, so let's try. So let's say that it's your mother's, and it's a second cousin. It's not once removed.
Well, that's what they call it,
Mm-hmm.
but they could be an erroneous term.
So if they're a second cousin, and there's no removal, and they're right about it being second cousin, because sometimes the children, sometimes people get confused. So my grand aunt Jeanette, her son Bill is a first cousin but removed, right? So if they are in fact second cousins, then it means that they are great grandchildren of someone. And if it's your mom and she's the great grandchild, then that means that you are the second great grandchild of that person, that common ancestor. And so if you are the second great grandchild and the relative is a great grandchild, then you are a second cousin once removed to that relative. To your mom, they're a second cousin.
Okay.
To you, they're second cousin once removed, because it's a different generation.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Other questions? Miss Darlene, did you have a question?
I had more of a comment. I've always wanted to know about, once removed. I have a better understanding of what that means now.
Good, good.
I think knowing that they're from a different generation, I think that really helps put things in perspective as to where they are on the map, on the chart, forgive me.
I hope it demystifies it a little
Yes.
bit, because if they're in the same family generation as you, there's no removal. And
Right.
then if they're in a generation older than you or a generation,
Younger.
I'm just saying older and younger. Again, it's not the age of the person, it's the
No,
family
no.
generation.
Yes.
And it's why you can have someone who's a first cousin twice removed who's younger than you, and another first cousin twice removed who's considerably older than you.
So all these years, I would say to my second cousin, she's my second cousin, when I would introduce her, but she's actually second cousin once removed now. So it makes a lot of difference now.
Yeah, my wife has a cousin who is auntie type age to us, and so we call her Aunt Roz. She's officially a cousin, but within the family structure, she functions more as an aunt than a cousin. So
Right.
that's another piece of it. If I plug Roz into the family tree, it's going to tell me that she's, a cousin a generation removed
Right.
to my spouse, not to me, right? Because
Right.
it's not my side of the family, but it's all within the culture of my extended family.
Yes.
She's
Right.
Aunt Roz.
Yeah.
But really, for genealogical purposes, for other kinds of relationships, she is a cousin. So.
Right. Yeah. I don't know if you touched upon this, or maybe you can expand on it a little bit more. Cousin-in-laws. So my husband has cousins in Kentucky and Indiana, and they're very dear. I just love them to pieces. I married into the family. They're not my cousins in any way, but I recognize them and have accepted them as family. So,
Well, I'm a big believer in the family that we're born into, and the family that we choose, and the family that we marry into. And
yes.
so you don't have to say, these are my cousins-in-law. If you're introducing them to someone, you could say, these are my cousins. And you might clarify they're related to your spouse.
Okay.
But in a day-to-day setting, we are caring about these degrees and these removes because it helps us understand where people fit into the genealogical picture. But it really, it's culturally for us, we might be using the correct term, but we might kind of slide it a little bit.
Okay.
In other cultures, some of the people you're talking about would not be called cousins. They would be called something else, and everyone would understand. Your in-laws would not have the generic in-law term. What you and I recognize as a cousin-in-law, if it's a man or a woman, depending on which side of your husband's tree it's on, whether it's his mother or father, they would have, each of them would have a specific title.
Yeah.
That would be much more complicated than what we are doing, where we just have the buckets of cousins.
Yeah. I like to get
So.
away from titles and just, accept the family member. It's a family member,
Exactly, and that's
That's
when
important.
we're talking about our relationships, the most important thing is they're part of our family. When we're talking about our genealogy, then the precise term helps us understand where they fit and how the people that they are related to relate to us. So
Exactly.
it's two separate purposes, I think.
Yes, I agree.
So, all right, what other, before I go back to the last few slides, are there other questions folks have? Shall I take one more trip through the degrees versus removes? Would that be helpful for folks?
I don't think it'll help me. I'm just gonna go offline and look.
Well, you know what, Gabe, if you can stay for a moment or two at the end, I will go over the cousin chart with you to make sure that you understand it, because I know you're serious about your genealogy, and you know, you could get here when you could get here tonight. So we can take a moment to go over it again towards the end there.
Okay.
All right, so we talked a little bit about in-laws. I want to just mention about half siblings and about step relationships. You know, if you have a half brother or half sister, it means that you're sharing one parent. This is not an uncommon situation in today, but also the further back we go. You know, my grandfather Ernest, who I use as an example in lots of the classes, his mom died when he was about 12, and his dad remarried. And from everything I can tell, the new his stepmom essentially was a very loving parent, and he had 3 half sisters who he loved dearly that came along. And you can add, when you're doing a relationship, you can add the word half to describe someone, so that it's you know, to make it more complete or more accurate. Basically, half siblings share one parent. And then the step relationship means that a marriage happened, someone came into the family, but that you don't share a parent with that person. So in trying to think about resources, Kristen has been sharing some resources in the chat, and we will also link those once we have this YouTube video ready to go. What I would like to suggest to you is that there are plenty of good books out there about relationships. You can search online for books. You can search, if you use Amazon, if you come to the Salinas Public Library website. If you live in the area, you can come pick up a physical book. If you don't live in the area, you can see if we have any. You can get a electronic library card with a 6-month term, and see if we have anything in that you could download to read. But when it comes to searching, kinship is one term that can be really useful, and just saying relationship names is another search term that can be really useful. Canon Law has provided me with some above and beyond the church-related resources. It scoops up a whole lot of different charts and different kinds of information. So, you know, after you've searched a little bit online with those terms, you'll be able to, you know, hone those down a little bit to be able to find the best searches. I would also encourage you to make use of YouTube. There are some great genealogy channels. I particularly enjoy Genealogy TV, and I enjoy Lisa Louise Cook's videos. But there are lots of folks. That video that I showed a bit of at the start, that guy put that together. He's actually a language expert, and has videos about what ancient Sumerian actually sounded like, and, you know, different language and literacy related things. But he had this one that was about kinship names. So above and beyond the usual suspects for information, you know, there are some great video resources at YouTube. And Kristen, there's a question that you wanted to share?
Well, somebody just had a question. I think that that Gay actually answered it. I believe it's herself, and she just said, you know, what do you do with children born out of wedlock? Ancestry doesn't seem to allow this, and then said, guess he's a half sibling.
So Ancestry is not in the business of whether someone is legitimate or not. They do, you know, if someone to have the relationship, they want someone in as father and mother. You don't have to put a marriage date in, but if you put people in as the father and mother, if it's out of wedlock, meaning there was some cheating, then you can still put the parent of that person in. And yes, they would be a half sibling, but you should be able to get them into your ancestry chart. All right, we will take a moment more for questions, but I wanted to be sure you knew the next class that's coming up is in August, and it's Deciphering Old Writing. If you are doing genealogy, and the fabulous thing is that there are so many original documents that are available online that you don't have to actually go to an archive to get a look at old documents. But there are some basic things that you can learn that will help you with from 1750 on to even, you know, the 1940 census, and things you can learn about how to decipher things, what to expect in certain kinds of documents, what to do if it's clear that the person writing the document maybe had a palsy, so their hand was trembling, etc. So I invite you to our next class, Deciphering Old Writing. You can register online. There's a link there. You can also, if you go to the Salinas Public Library website, and on the front page, click on the calendar and go to the 19th. The description is there, and the link to register is also there. So I hope you will think about attending that. I'm super excited because I really love deciphering old writing, and the stuff that I've taught myself, the stuff that I've learned about how to decipher it. I am way not perfect, but I have so much fun doing it. And to be able to help someone take a look at something and sort out what it is, what looked illegible a minute ago, all of a sudden you start to see what this document is just really fun. So I hope you will consider joining us. There will be 3 more classes in the fall, in October, November, and December. I will be repeating the Getting Started class in October. And in November, it will be using the census, which will include a little bit of a look at what we anticipate being able to find out. The 1950 census is going to be available theoretically April next year. The 1950 census will come online for us to be able to use. So I can't show you it, but we can talk about what we know about the information that will be available there and how to be ready to make the best use of that. And then in December, the class is going to be about reading maps. My bachelor's degree is actually in forestry. I used to make maps. I used to rely on maps. I love maps, from contemporary ones to old ones. And so we will take a look at how to make sense of the kinds of maps you can find. We'll also take a look at where you can find maps, and maps can make a real difference. If you don't understand why your family emigrated, went down and then back up in the state they were in, why didn't they just go straight west? You take a look at some of the maps and all of a sudden you see a mountain or a marsh. It can really help you with the context of what your relatives faced, in their daily life, whatever time period we're looking at. So those are on we have the basic link in the calendar on the website, but the fancy flyer and things are not ready for those yet. So what questions do you have? Does anybody else want to stick around for a quick review of the relationship charts? How else can I help you, folks?
Cathy, did you want to bring up anything about the work group?
Oh, thank you. So we have here at Salinas Public Library, we have a genealogy work group. It meets once a month. We've got everything from very experienced people to brand new people who come to it. And it's a very informal group. It's still virtual at this point. It is on the fourth Tuesday each month. We meet from 6 to 7 p.m. The focus of the work group coming up, we're going to talk about military records, what kind exist, where to find them, ways you can make the best use of them. And each month when we meet, it's the folks who are at the group who decide what we're going to focus on the next time. Sometimes we have a short presentation by somebody who's got knowledge of the subject. Other times it's just us sharing what we know. And there's a surprising amount of information within the group. I hope you would consider joining us. There's no geographic limit. We're going to stay virtual probably well into, if not, it may be next January when we come back together in person. But even at that point, we're probably going to have a virtual option because even for folks in town, it's turned out to be very handy. They can make it easier when they can stay virtual rather than coming over to the library. But some folks really love being together at the library, so we'll probably have a hybrid, but it's likely to stay completely virtual through the end of the calendar year. So thank you for reminding me about that, Kristen. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. And people come once and then maybe they can't come for a couple months, and some people drop in once and that's enough. Some come every month. So you're very welcome at any point to join us. So any last questions before I go back to the cousin chart?
I have one more question.
Sure.
So I remember once you spoke about resources or people that can help you. Do you know one or two that could help? Just because I find it so confusing sometimes to go through the process.
With specifically related to cousins?
No, just in general. Like I get lost.
Let me just ask, for genealogy or for relationships?
Genealogy.
Okay. The Roots Tech Connect conference is one of the largest genealogy conferences around, and this last year it was virtual. And the nice thing is that they are making it available until the next one happens. And so let me pull up my screen here. The Roots Tech, there are thousands of pre-recorded videos on every genealogy topic that you can imagine. And it is completely free. And there are people who are recognized experts in the field, and there are people who are less well known, but still did really, really good programs. One of the things that they have, the Guide Me, they have some curated lists in different topic areas. And so you can see they've got, for getting started, they've got series of videos that can help you make sure you really know what you're doing and why you're doing it. There are sets of videos about using family search, about ancestry, MyHeritage, which is another one of the big programs. There's all kinds of videos about DNA. And so you can, if you don't know where to start, and especially if you're, just feeling like you're not quite sure that you know as much as you'd like about genealogy to feel confident, then any of these curated lists are good. You can also search by topic. And so you will be able to find, I have some Swiss relatives, so I could look up Swiss and up would come anything related to Swiss genealogy, right? And there's just, I can't even begin to tell you how many videos they are and of what good quality they are. So I really recommend that You know, this is a resource that's going away in January or February next year. A lot of the videos are very short. There are other videos that are much longer. One of the things you can do is if you don't already have a family search account with Family Search, which is one of the big places to do your genealogy, then go ahead and it's free, it's completely free. Make a Family Search account, even if you don't care one way or the other about using it to do your tree. If you make the account, then you can put together your own playlist, and you can go through and find the videos that you want to watch, and you don't have to search for them every time. You put together a playlist, and then you can pop in, you know, you got 20 minutes, you can find a video that's 20 minutes long, or you're feeling confused on a certain topic, you can find something on that topic on your list. It really gives you a chance to, you know, focus on the ones that are going to be most helpful to you. So that's, I just can't say enough how fabulous I think that is. The other thing I would say is that both Family Search and Ancestry have videos on all kinds of topics related to, you know, related to doing your genealogy. And so, you know, the wiki that Family Search has an amazing number of videos on all kinds of topics, including information about specific states, you know, where to look for the resources, what kind of resources are available at from that state. So for improving your own, you know, sort of professional development in genealogy, those would be 3 sites, 3 ways that I would really recommend. And Gay, I know you're local. The library is open now. If you want to come in and take a look at the genealogy shelf, or you can check it online and put the books on hold and come pick them up. You know, we're happy to have you. So,
Thank you.
let me also mention that if any of you are interested in getting our weekly e-newsletter, which is where we promo lots of things, but the genealogy courses and the genealogy work group are always part of it. Go ahead and send me an email. I've had folks the last couple of classes, the folks who've gotten on our email list, so they'll be up to date all the time about what resources we have and what's going on with genealogy. So you're super welcome to shoot me an email, and you don't have to have a library card to be on our our weekly e-newsletter list. If you want a card, we'll help you. But even if you're not local, we're happy to have you be on our mailing list. And any other questions before we wrap it up? Kristen, let me just say before everybody goes, Kristen, thank you for volunteering, being willing to volunteer.
Very welcome. Joseph does have a question.
Sure.
Thank you.
So, okay.
Cathy, you're very patient. This stuff sounds so confusing on the face of it, but your charts made it, you know, and you gave us a variety of charts. Pick the one that works for you and you got it.
Yeah. Well, and you just, as soon as you got the bones of what it means, you know, I mean, pretty soon people are not going to need a chart at all. They're just going to look at their family tree and count back generations and be like, oh yeah, that's my blah, 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 without even having to look at the, you know, the ancestry posting. So
yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Very good. Then I'll say good night to everyone. If anyone had any last minute questions, that's great. Kristen, stick around just for a second. We'll make sure we're all set.
Okay.
But thank you very much, Diane. Please, Diane, feel free to reach out. Okay. All right. See you all later. Kristen, thank you. What a difference. And, you know, it's this first time through a class is always, you know, a little bit seat of pants. So I appreciate your flexibility and stick-to-itiveness.
Oh, it's not a problem. I felt really comfortable. It actually went much better. Not judging you, it went better from my perspective with where to put stuff in and how to get to the right questions. I always felt bad interrupting you and trying to find that good spot to kind of fit into your presentation. So I found that if I sent you a text, I felt bad about that too, because I noticed that you'd get distracted by it. So I tried really hard not to send a text.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting because I didn't feel distracted. I was sort of like reading it and taking it in, and some of them needed immediate action
Yeah.
and others didn't. But
Yeah. Well, I maybe it was because I knew that I was sending you a text that I could see that
Right.
there, and I'm not saying that there was a major distraction, but you could
Yeah.
tell that there was a little bit of a pause in your in what you were saying. And I know that I mean, I would do exactly the same thing. Matter of fact, I'd probably be more distracted by it. So I thought that the presentation was great. And I look forward to getting the slide deck on that one, because that's, I learned stuff and I wrote down my own notes when we were going through there. So great class.
Well, good. I just, people get so frazzled by it, but as soon as you have some basic framework to hang things on, and sometimes it just takes somebody walking you through it the second and third and fourth time. So
Right. Have you ever given any thought to having a kind of a hard copy to give as a handout before the
Yes,
classes
and I
start?
just don't have time.
Okay.
That's like a step too far. This is like my position. I'm not officially supposed to be doing programming at all.
Okay.
And so, but I've carved this out because I was sure that this would be something that would be popular. And so
Right.
we are so understaffed right now, at the point that I've got that I'm back up to 3 adult services librarians, et cetera, and some of the other things that I'm doing because we just have Hisela right now.
Well, I want
who's been doing yeoman duty, but
right. Well, I wonder if we could take from the recording and the slide deck to make the handout, and then if you teach the class a second time, the handout's then available. Because I could help with that.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind, because typically if I teach a class a second time, I usually, like, I know all the things I would do differently, blah blah blah. I'm a super like, I'm somewhere between a get it done and a perfectionist, but I prefer it to be as perfect as possible.
Yeah.
And the first time through is never perfect, in my estimation.
Right.
But yeah, I'm a big, like, I like when people have something to go away with. I also I probably would not distribute it much before the class, because the handouts, if a handout is all they need, then they don't need to come to the class and they can go online. Like, there's some balance between.
Oh, of course. And most of and so a little bit of background here is, it's like, I've been doing genealogy for a very, very long time, but because of the pandemic, it really gave me the opportunity to start looking for things online. And as soon as you start looking for one thing, then everything starts popping up. And so I've been taking classes, with you, some from Connecticut, some from Wisconsin, some from Massachusetts. Trying to think, there's a bunch of classes, and most of the time what they do is they just have the handout available when you join. The only bad thing is I normally like to print mine. Yeah. So normally it's like I get on there, and then as soon as I see that there's a handout, I get there and I print it. So it's printing in the other room, and then I run over and get it real quick. And then today I got an email reminder about my class that's tomorrow, and they already had the handout in with the join information for the Zoom meeting. So I was able to get it printed before tomorrow, but I think that they hold back some of the real content. They just give you maybe a few links to go to and some general stuff.
Yeah.
So,
If I were teaching this class at a community college, there would be handouts, there would be whatever, but it's just like there is just not at this time. There's not bandwidth
right,
for me to do it. Making the
right.
class happen is what I can
Totally
do
understand.
right now. So yeah.
And then maybe if you have a class that you're going to teach again, and you want me to try and create a document through the slide deck, what you can do is you can give it to me. I can try and put something together, and I can send it to you, and you can see if you like it. And if you don't, or if you decide, oh, if I am teaching this, I want to add this section, then you can probably modify it yourself.
Yeah.
And then we can, kind of go from there. But I am willing to help.
Okay.
If you want. I mean,
Yeah,
don't do it the day ahead of time, because I'm going to need more time than that to prepare it. But
well, like I know, for the getting started class, I shifted that, like I shifted and redid parts of it for, like, I was fairly satisfied the last time I did it. So for the next one, like I may shift a picture or something, but content wise, I think it was fine.
Right.
That was like the third time I'd done it. So I was, I had enough time, and
right.
So maybe I'll ship you that's not till October, right? So we got lots of time, but maybe I'll ship that to you at some point. But yeah, the biggest, it's even when I'm not putting something together for the first time is the hardest thing. And
of course,
just, time wise, until something shifts here, it's always going to be the day of the finishing it, right?
Right.
But if I offer this one again, and this one, it won't be for a while. But if I offer this one again, then there are things I would rearrange, blah blah blah. But it really, and this one, because it's so straight up confusing for folks, I think this one is always going to have more. Like, I was kind of glad it was a smaller group, because it's not good teaching if you can't stop to make sure people know.
Right.
And if you don't get the question answered, then you lose folks.
Right. Well, we really
need to hear it 3 times to get it done. It's just.
Yeah, we didn't have very many questions, and when we did, we got them addressed right away. So, I mean, it would have been much harder if we had a lot of questions. And, I wanted to make sure, I felt like I could answer some of the questions that were in there, but I wanted you to have the opportunity to answer those because you're the presenter. So
sure. Well, and there's, like I say, like if you and I do this in the future, on classes that you either have already attended or don't care as much about, then, like, we would work out a rhythm. There would be things that you would know were perfectly suited for you to answer. And, like I feel like I can trust your judgment. Should I ask Kath, or should I just answer?
Right. Well, like the one about the half sibling, I could have answered that one. The ancestry thing. That's, I've got I don't have half siblings, but I have step siblings that have half sisters.
Gotcha.
So I already have them in my family tree, so I already kind of know how to put them in there. So
yeah.
Well, I did hear
everybody that's related can get in there. Just anyway, blah blah blah. But
so I did kind of hear you say that you think that the online series that you're doing is going to probably continue through